I never thought the sharpest instinct I'd ever use in my life would come not on the railroad, but in my own family. My name is Harold Miller. I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a locomotive engineer for the Southern Pacific Railroad. I've guided 40-ton machines through blizzards, floods, and pitch-black mountain tunnels in the dead of night. And in all those years, there was one thing I learned that no training manual ever taught me: the feeling in your gut when something is wrong. Not a sound, not a signal, just a knowing. That feeling saved my train more times than I can count, and on a Saturday morning in October, it saved my marriage, my home, and what little was left of my faith in the people I loved most. I want to tell you this story the way it happened, slowly at first, then all at once. Because the betrayal didn't come from a stranger. It didn't come from a business partner or a neighbor or someone who never claimed to love me. It came from my daughter, my only child, the little girl I once carried on my shoulders through a county fair, laughing so hard she could barely breathe. And if you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, this story is for you. It was a crisp autumn Saturday, and my wife Louise and I were driving out to visit our daughter Diane's new place, a farmhouse she and her husband Greg had moved into just 2 months before. We hadn't seen the grandkids in almost 3 months. 2 boys, 7 and 10. I'd been looking forward to it all week. Louise had packed a cooler with her peach cobbler, the boys' favorite, and a batch of peanut butter cookies. She'd been humming to herself since breakfast. I remember thinking, this is what retirement is supposed to feel like. But about a mile from Diane's house, something shifted in me. I slowed the truck without thinking. Louise looked up from her crossword puzzle. "Harold, what's wrong?" I didn't answer right away. I was watching. There were 3 vehicles parked along the gravel road that didn't belong there. A black SUV with no plates I could read, a gray sedan partially hidden behind a row of oak trees, and a pickup truck idling near the base of Diane's driveway, engine running, nobody visible inside. Rural roads don't have that kind of traffic on a Saturday morning. And then I saw Diane. She was standing on her front porch, not waving, not smiling, just standing there with her arms crossed, staring in our direction, like she was waiting, but not the way you wait for people you're happy to see. I put the truck in reverse. "Harold?" "I know," I said quietly. "Just trust me." I backed up 100 yards, turned us around on a dirt easement, and drove the other direction without a word. Louise stared at me. I stared at the road. But that was just the beginning of my plan. We drove to a rest stop about 4 miles back, one of those old state highway pull-offs with a couple of picnic tables and a rusted water fountain that's never worked in the 20 years I've been passing it. I pulled in behind a transport trailer where we couldn't be easily seen from the road, and I turned off the engine. Louise sat very still. She knows me. After 43 years of marriage, she can read the difference between me being worried and me being sure. This was sure. "Talk to me," she said. So I did. I told her what I saw. The vehicles, the positions, the body language, the way Diane was standing, not like a daughter, but like someone playing a role in a scene she'd rehearsed. Louise listened without interrupting. That's one of the things I've always loved about her. She doesn't panic first. She processes. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Harold, 3 months ago, when Diane asked you those questions about the house," I nodded slowly. I hadn't told Louise everything about that conversation. Diane had called me in July, out of nowhere, on a Tuesday afternoon. She said she just wanted to catch up. But within 10 minutes, the conversation turned. She started asking about the deed to our house, whether we'd ever considered putting it in a family trust, whether I knew how much my railroad pension paid out monthly, whether Louise and I had a will, and who our attorney was. I told her we were fine and changed the subject. But afterward, I sat on the back porch for an hour and stared at the garden and felt something hollow in my chest that I couldn't name. I told myself I was being paranoid, that she was just being practical, that children sometimes started thinking about these things when their parents got older. I told myself a lot of things. "She's in trouble," Louise said quietly. It wasn't a question. "I think she's been in trouble for a while," I said. "And I think whatever's happening at that house today is connected to it." Louise opened the glove compartment and took out her reading glasses. Then she picked up her phone. "I'm going to call her." "Not yet," I said. "Wait." And right on cue, as if the universe agreed with me, my phone rang. Diane's name on the screen. I answered on the second ring. "Dad!" Her voice was bright, too bright, the way someone sounds when they're performing cheerfulness for an audience. "Where are you guys? The boys are ready, and I've got lunch going." "We got turned around," I said, keeping my voice even. "GPS took us the wrong way." "Oh, that's so frustrating. Okay, well, you're coming from Route 9, right? Just take Miller Creek Road and—" "Diane?" I kept my voice very calm. "Are you okay?" A half beat of silence. Just a half beat, but I heard it. "Of course, Dad. Why wouldn't I be?" "No reason. We'll be there soon." I hung up. Louise looked at me over her glasses. "She's not okay." "No," I said, "she is not." We sat there for a few minutes, and I thought about Diane as a little girl, the way she used to run to the front door when I came home from a long run, still in my uniform, the way she'd say, "Daddy, did you see anything cool from the train today?" And I'd always make something up, a family of deer, a double rainbow, a red-tailed hawk riding the wind right alongside the engine. She'd listen with her whole face, wide eyes, open mouth. Where did that little girl go? I didn't know yet just how bad it was, but I was about to find out. 15 minutes later, a text came in from a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Miller, we know you're nearby. It would be in everyone's best interest if you came back to the property. This can all be handled quietly. No one wants things to get complicated." Louise read it over my shoulder. I watched the color leave her face. "Harold," she whispered. "I know." Then Greg called, my son-in-law, a man I'd shaken hands with at a church wedding 11 years ago, a man who had sat at my Thanksgiving table and watched football in my living room and borrowed my good socket wrench set and never returned it. I almost didn't answer, but I needed to hear it for myself. "Harold," his voice was low, controlled, like he'd rehearsed this too. "I don't want this to get out of hand. Diane is going through something right now, and we need some help from the family. That's all this is, family helping family." "Greg," I said, "who are those men parked on your road?" Silence. "They're just associates, people who are helping us get some things sorted out. It's nothing—" "Greg," I cut him off, "I'm going to ask you one time, plainly, as a man. What were you planning to do today when we walked through that door?" The silence this time was longer. And in that silence, I heard everything. "We just need the house, Harold. You and Louise are retired. You don't need a 4-bedroom house. We thought, Diane thought, if we explained it in person, with a notary there, it would be—" "A notary?" I repeated. "Just to transfer the deed. It could be structured as a loan even, something informal, between family." I hung up. I sat there holding the phone, and I felt something move through me that I can only describe as grief with a hard edge on it, like a river that had frozen over. Everything I thought I understood about my daughter, her choices, her love for us, the life she'd built, it was all tilting in a direction I didn't want to look at. Louise had her hand over her mouth. "They were going to pressure us," she said, "with those men there, with a notary, with nowhere to go. They were going to sit us down and not let us leave until we signed." "That's what I think," I said. "Harold, that's not just wrong, that's a crime." And that's when I looked at my wife, this woman who has stood beside me through 31 winters of late shifts and missed holidays and the kind of exhaustion that goes down to the bone, and I saw something in her eyes I recognized. Not panic, not despair, clarity. She was already dialing. "I'm calling the police," she said, "and then I'm calling our attorney." "Good," I said, "and I'm going to save every single message and voicemail." If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, you know what that moment feels like. That moment when the version of a person you've been protecting in your head finally steps aside and you see who they actually are. It doesn't feel like anger, not at first. It feels like a door closing very quietly in a house you thought you knew. Then, as I looked up and saw the gray sedan slow rolling past the rest stop entrance, looking for us, the anger arrived, and it was very, very quiet. The quietest kind. Louise is not a dramatic woman. She was a school librarian for 27 years. She's the kind of person who returns library books 3 days early and always has a thank you note in the car. But she is also, when the moment demands it, absolutely made of iron. She gave the dispatcher our exact location, described the vehicles she'd seen, read the threatening text message out loud, and summarized the entire situation in under 3 minutes with the precision of a woman filing a reference report. When she hung up, she turned to me and said, "They're sending 2 units. We stay here." "Understood," I said. While we waited, I saved every text. I recorded myself summarizing both phone calls while the details were fresh. I wrote down the license plate I'd caught a partial on from the black SUV. Louise did the same from memory with what she'd seen from the car. 40 years ago, I never would have thought to do any of that. But there's something about getting older that changes you. Not just in the obvious ways, but in this deeper way. You stop trusting that things will work out on their own. You start understanding that justice doesn't just happen. You have to build it, evidence by evidence, step by step. The police arrived in about 12 minutes. 2 young officers, calm and professional. We showed them everything, the messages, the call log, the note I'd written. I explained the situation as plainly as I could. The senior officer, a woman named Deputy Trask, listened carefully. Then she said, "Sir, I want to be honest with you. If what you're describing is accurate, a planned coercion with outside parties present, a notary waiting on site, and a threatening text, that's not a family dispute. That's elder financial abuse." I had never heard those words applied to my life before. Elder financial abuse. I'm a retired engineer. I rode iron horses for 3 decades, and now I was sitting in a rest stop being told my daughter had helped plan a crime against me. "I understand," I said, and I kept my voice steady. I wasn't going to fall apart in front of strangers, but Louise reached over and took my hand, and I held it tight. The officers drove out to the property. A 3rd unit met them there. Louise and I waited. I don't know how long it was. It felt like a long time. I watched a red-tailed hawk circling over the tree line, just like the ones I used to invent for Diane when she was little. And I thought about how strange life is, how the same world that gives you the most beautiful things can also break your heart completely, sometimes on the same afternoon. My phone buzzed. Deputy Trask. "Mr. Miller, we're at the residence. We found a notarized deed transfer prepared with your signature already filled in, not signed but filled in. There are also loan documents naming your railroad pension as collateral. 2 individuals on the property have no legitimate reason to be there and are being questioned. Your daughter and son-in-law are being detained for questioning. The children is safe." I exhaled slowly. "Thank you," I said. When I put the phone down, Louise was watching me. "It was real," she said quietly. "It was real," I confirmed. She looked out the window for a moment. Then she said very softly, "Those poor boys." And that, not the documents, not the coercion, not even the betrayal, that was what broke something in me. Not with anger, just with sadness. Those 2 little boys, 7 and 10 years old, who had no idea what their parents had put in motion, who had been used as bait. "Come see the grandkids. Come in, sit down, sign here." I pressed my lips together and looked at that hawk. I'm not going to fall apart, I thought. There's still work to do. In the weeks that followed, the legal picture became very clear very quickly. Greg's associates turned out to be connected to a private debt collection operation with a history of high-pressure tactics, not quite criminal on their own, but well into the gray area. Greg had significant gambling debts, far larger than anyone in the family knew. Diane had co-signed on several of those debts. Their business had failed 8 months prior. They were desperate. And desperate people, I've learned, don't always think about who they're going to hurt. They just think about the problem in front of them. I had one last phone call with Diane before the attorneys took over. She asked to speak to me directly. No lawyers, just us. I agreed. She cried from the first word. She told me she was sorry, that Greg had pushed her, that she hadn't thought it would go this far, that she loved me and never wanted to hurt me. I listened to every word. I let her finish. Then I said, Diane, I'm not going to tell you that what you did was understandable because it wasn't. And I'm not going to pretend that I can look at you right now the way I did before because I can't. But I want you to hear me. She was quiet, crying. What Greg talked you into, or what you convinced yourself, wasn't help. It wasn't love. Family doesn't corner family. Family doesn't bring strangers with documents to a Sunday visit and call it helping. Do you understand the difference? Yes, she whispered. Okay, I said. Then we'll figure out the rest from there. If you've ever had to say the truth to someone you love when the truth is going to hurt them, you know that it doesn't feel like power. It feels like grief with your eyes open. Greg ultimately pled guilty to a reduced charge of attempted financial fraud and received probation and mandatory repayment. The outside associates were charged separately. Diane was not criminally charged. The attorneys determined she had been significantly under Greg's influence, and the evidence supported that to a degree. But there were civil proceedings, and the road ahead was long for both of them. The boys came to stay with us for several months, 7 and 10, Noah and Caleb. They ate Louise's peach cobbler and helped me in the garden and watched television in the evenings like everything was fine, the way kids do when adults have let them down and they don't have the language for it yet. One evening, Noah, the older one, sat down next to me on the porch while I was drinking my coffee. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "Grandpa, why did you call the police on my mom?" I set my coffee cup down on the railing and looked at him. "Because," I said, "I love your mom, and sometimes when someone we love is making a very bad choice, the most loving thing we can do is stop them, even when it hurts." He looked at me with those serious 10-year-old eyes. "Did it hurt you?" "Yeah," I said, "it did." He leaned against my arm. "I'm sorry, Grandpa." "Don't be sorry," I said. "You didn't do anything. You just be a good kid. That's enough." We sat there in the October evening air, and the dog came up and put its head on Noah's knee, and somewhere down the road a neighbor was burning leaves, and that particular smell, wood smoke and autumn, settled over us like a quiet benediction. I thought, this is still my life. It's broken in places I didn't expect, but it's still mine. Time does what time does. It moves forward whether you ask it to or not. Diane and Greg separated 8 months after the charges were filed. She went through counseling, mandated at first, then chosen. It took almost 2 years before Louise and I could sit at the same table with her and feel anything close to normal. But we did get there, slowly, with a lot of silences and a few hard conversations and more than a few moments where one of us nearly walked out of the room and didn't. I want to be honest about that, because a lot of stories like this end with a bow on top. Clean forgiveness, a single conversation that fixes everything. That's not how it went for us. Forgiveness, I've come to believe, isn't a moment. It's a practice. It's something you choose over and over again, not because the other person deserves it on any given day, but because you need to keep living. Because the alternative, carrying it like a stone in your chest for the rest of your days, is worse. I've seen men do that, seen what it does to them. I wasn't going to let this take another thing from me. Louise put it better than I ever could one evening when we were sitting in the kitchen after dinner and the house was quiet. She said, "I don't trust Diane the way I used to. I might never, but I still love her. And I think those two things can live in the same heart at the same time." I thought about that for a long time. I think she's right. 3 years after that October Saturday, we had a small family gathering. Just us, Diane, and the boys. No Greg. Nothing formal. Louise made her peach cobbler. I fired up the grill. Noah, who was 13 now, had gotten tall almost overnight, and Caleb kept following the dog around the yard like a shadow. It wasn't perfect. There were moments of awkwardness, conversations that started and then carefully stepped around something. There were things we didn't say, because some things are better left for later or for never. But it was real. It was honest. And when Diane helped Louise carry the dishes in from the porch, and I watched them through the kitchen window, side by side, not quite easy with each other, but not pretending either, I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized was still wound tight. If you've ever had to rebuild something you thought was permanent, you know that what you build the second time is different. It's not as smooth. It shows the repairs. But sometimes the repaired version is stronger than the original because you know exactly what it cost. I walked out to the back fence line before dinner, the way I always do, out of habit, and I stood there and looked at the field behind the house and thought about that October morning. The trucks on the gravel road, the text message, Louise dialing the police with her reading glasses still on. And I thought about myself, 30 years younger, in the cab of a locomotive, learning that your gut tells you things your brain hasn't caught up to yet. Learning that sometimes the most important decision you make is the decision to stop, to look, to turn the train around before it goes somewhere it can't come back from. I turned the car around that day, and it saved everything worth saving. People ask me sometimes, friends, old railroad buddies, the guys I have coffee with on Thursday mornings. They ask me what I would have done differently, whether I could have seen it coming sooner, whether things might have gone easier if I'd handled it some other way. I always think before I answer that. The truth is, I don't think there was an easier way. Some situations don't come with easy exits. They come with hard choices and longer roads and the kind of lessons that take years to fully understand. What I know now, standing on the other side of it, is this. Love is not the same thing as silence. Protecting your family sometimes means protecting them from themselves. And being a parent doesn't stop when your child grows up. It just changes shape. The job becomes harder and quieter, and sometimes it breaks your heart completely. But the alternative, turning away, staying silent, letting fear or sentiment or the simple human desire to keep the peace stop you from doing what's right, that comes with its own cost. It just comes later, with interest. Diane is doing better now. She's working at a school. She calls Louise on Sundays. The boys are growing up the way boys do, loud and distracted and occasional in the way teenagers are. They come for holidays. They eat Louise's cobbler. Noah has started asking me questions about the railroad, which I find quietly thrilling. The road isn't completely smooth. It probably never will be, but it's real, and I'll take real over perfect any day of the week. I turned that car around on a Tuesday in October, and I haven't looked back. Not with regret, anyway. The looking back I do is the kind where you take stock, where you remember what it cost and remind yourself it was worth it. Because it was. For the first time in a long time, standing in that field behind my house, watching my daughter help my wife set the table, I felt free. What would you have done?